land is your land, and this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. As I went a-walking that ribbon of highway, and I saw above me that endless skyway, I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me.
From WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. This is special programming today on the 23rd of September 2018. We'll be talking about the historic Clarence Thomas hearing, Anita Hill in the hot seat. And next week, Dr. Ford will be there in the seat, and some of the same cast of characters will be there also. We titled this episode Clarence Thomas 2.0. And the reason for doing this is that basically there are some similarities and some that factors that are dissimilar. First of all, Clarence Thomas was a Republican hack, and so is Brett Kavanaugh. He's been around in several administrations. He is a very active right-winger. One of his cronies named Whalen, I think his name is Whalen, had written a memo, or at least had put forth a alternative theory of what happened in Maryland, and with the what we termed the beer boys, because they were high schoolers at the time, they had set as their goal to drink 100 kegs of beer during their tenure. Of course, they were underage at the incident. Kavanaugh was 17. Dr. Ford was 15 at the time. But this was not unusual. This was the state of things, particularly in many of those suburban areas around Washington, D.C. All of the young people involved at that time went to preparatory schools that were male and female. They were still designated that. They were harping back to many years before. And you get an idea of the type of class makeup in those communities. Much different from the country side that Clarence Thomas came from around Savannah, Georgia. And, of course, Anita Hill out in the Oklahoma hills, literally, not a pun. But those backgrounds were different. They were farming communities and, to a certain extent, of the working class. Anita Hill was trained at a religious school, Clarence Thomas at Yale University, and, of course, Kavanaugh at, I believe, at Yale also. And the difference there in terms of their socialization was very different. Thomas had went to seminary in St. Louis, and one of the seminarians called him the N-word, and he quit. So he went from being a /seminarian monk type to a Republican water boy. There's no other way to put it. And thus he formed his particular type of conservatism, very right-wing. He replaced the great legal scholar, activist, Justice Thurgood Marshall. And as Thurgood Marshall, Justice Marshall, said that the person that, and in those days justices didn't comment directly on these nominees, but he said, well, the person could be a snake. And no doubt this character, Thomas, has bit us many, many times. And we understand that he was put there for a purpose, to uphold the right-wing agenda. But the right-wing agenda is the business agenda, and most of the time Thomas does come down with the business agenda. Now, one has to look at it that Thomas has been there now almost 30 years. So things do change in 30 years' time. And Anita Hill, then a law professor at the University of Oklahoma at that time, she's now at Brandeis, and has evolved as a symbol of, it wasn't the Me Too movement at that time. And that was also a time during the Thomas hearing that the traditional commercial networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, pretty much dominated. CNN was there, and they had the hearing, and there were a few women. I don't think Nancy Kasselbaum was on the panel. Perhaps she was. But one of the participants to be there Thursday was Orrin Hatch. He's still around. Senator Kennedy was also there, the late great Senator Kennedy. Senator Senator from Ohio, Metzenbaum, and numerous others at around. You'll hear Alan Simpson, the senator from Wyoming. He'll be interrogating Anita Hill. And the difference in that case also was the FBI did do a full investigation. They'll talk about the questioning of Anita Hill and various things that Clarence Thomas said. And supposedly he had asked her for dates continuously, and she decided not to date him. And thus he made these so-called explicit sexual comments. Now, that was not unusual for his era, making comments or telling jokes. Justice Marshall told jokes in his chamber, one of his law clerks. She was talking about it. But now she did not accuse Justice Marshall of sexually harassing her, just the jokes that he told. Various kinds of jokes that it wouldn't be told today in a workplace. But there was a difference in the country and how things were out there. Did you, in fact, have if you go out to Hollywood, the casting couch, as they call it? Yes. That came out of the 20s, 30s, and it's still alive today. But, again, because of the very high-profile cases, there has been an alert there, not only there, but we even had an individual that was assigned to Chairman Grassley's office, accused of sexual harassment, and in more than one place. Now, it's just not one incident with this person. He worked for a media firm. There are many, many media firms, so-called media firms. They're nothing but influence peddlers in Washington. And, of course, he resigned there. He was on leave to Grassley. But prior to that, he was working for a fellow out of North Carolina. And he had a history there. But imagine putting somebody with a history of sexual harassment as a special outside hire, as they call it, temporary person to be on this committee. These are some of the things that spill over in how the GOP is conducting their business. Now, in the Hill case, / Thomas case, they were both Republicans. A different kind of situation. Now, Anita Hill never alleged that Clarence Thomas actually assaulted her. He supposedly just harassed her. And there were numerous things going on there. And looking into, I'm not sure how deeply they looked into Anita Hill's, wouldn't have been unusual in those days, sexual activity, etc. Now, we were reading in the Post today, in terms of Kavanaugh, they will be asking him about what he was doing in high school, about his sexual life, etc. But there's no FBI investigation. the reports are the Republicans are frustrated because basically they have the old defense attorneys, prosecutors, basic defense attorneys, actually, of harping on Dr. Ford. But if they try to, as Thomas called it, do a high-tech lynching of Dr. Ford, it's all over for Kavanaugh, and they know it. So how do they get this information? They can't run a Lion Ted Cruz type tech where they go at it sort of using a bunch of flippables, things such as, well, how much money did you donate to liberal causes, etc. Were you promiscuous when you were a teenager? This is a woman in her late 40s, I assume early 50s, that has children, that was forced out of her house by death threats, etc., from various right-wing gangs / white supremacists, etc. Now, these are the kinds of people that Kavanaugh represents. Very clear. When you talk of this, I think his name is Will, his name is Ed, and we'll get that right. But when you speak of these kinds of people associated with these very right-wing groups like the Federalist Society, remember them from Columbia, hopping around there and slipping around Boston. But anyway, the situation is that these characters have become prominent. Why have they become prominent? Because you have people like old man Adelson out of Las Vegas. Don't hear his name much in this cycle. He's up in his 80s also. You have the infamous Koch brothers, formerly of Wichita, Kansas, now of Palm Springs and Palm Beach, Florida. They've made millions polluting the airs, waters, and streams of the American nation. And they have spent millions of dollars, perhaps billions, at least $1 billion, because they have billions. And we see this continual pattern of why these people were there. At the time, Clarence Thomas was working out of St. Louis with Danford. Danford was a so-called moderate senator, Republican senator from Missouri. He was also an Episcopal type of minister, whatever they call it. Anyway, he was in there, and of course Danford, the Danford Foundation, was Ralston Purina, the makers of cat food, dog food, and other things. But those were the people that were the engine behind Clarence Thomas, although Danford was not as right-wing as Thomas, but his wife was. She was out of Omaha, Nebraska, and still is a right-winger representing various right-wing types of PR efforts. What the right wing has been able to do through the Heritage Foundation, the Cato, etc., they moved a long time ago to start producing their own papers, academic papers. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand. We did a program, incidentally, called The Eggheads. You can look it up. But the right wing has always tried to formulate a certain brand of scholarship, which for the most part is sophistry, is a pseudo-type academic scholarship, but not as blatant as what we have with the Trump people, alternative facts, as they call it. Well, alternative facts, there are a lot of characters. You go to InfoWorld, that is a site of alternative facts. In other words, lies. Nothing but blatant lies. And now you look at Jones, some of his sites have been taken down. Some of his money-making sites have been, it was all about the money and disinformation. But all this feeds into a cycle. And this is where the Republicans are at this stage of the game. And we go back to Clarence Thomas and his so-called electronic lynching. where he basically said that people were trying to stand in his path of moving forward, his career path. Well, he did move forward. He hasn't become Chief Justice. He's still an Associate Justice almost 30 years later, and he will be that until he leaves. But he has influenced the judiciary and the body of law. He's always been on these 5-4 winning decisions most of the time. I'd say 95% of the time. There, he served the purpose of the business interests. And this is the same thing with this Brett Kavanaugh character. But in addition with Kavanaugh serving the business interests, he has also been anti-women. He does not see Roe versus Wade as settled law. He's anti-working people. He's anti-African American in that he would uphold any types of laws that are anti-affirmative action or anti-diversity, whatever you want to call it, and hark back to the 50s. This is all it's about. And if you go to the Beer Boys Club or whatever it was that he was the quote-unquote treasurer of, it's the same thing. They were trying to maintain a class system, and you have to see it as a class system, and this has been his entire occupation, coming out of quote-unquote privilege, white privilege, or class privilege. In other words, one of the more important distinctions here, you hear the word white privilege bantered about. But white privilege in this nation, as it was in South Africa under apartheid, and it was here under apartheid, the name Jim Crow. But it's the same thing. It's a class situation. You start with a racial definition, and then you go to a class definition. And it is always normally that situation, as in the American landscape. You started out with the so-called founders of the country that put together the Constitution and decided on a republic. They did not decide on a democracy, but that is a debate for another day. But the whole point there was, in the early days, the indentured servants who were both black and white worked together. And that's not the first instance in the American body politic in terms of struggle here in this country that has happened. Well, then there was a change, a racial change, moving to an apartheid-type government. This before the Civil War, which the Southerners called the war between the states. But no, it was a civil war. It was a revolution. It was a situation where you had part of the country that decided they wanted to be under a feudal system of slavery, and another part with Lincoln just to keep the Union together. In fact, there was an amendment out there. I don't recall the name of the amendment, the person that offered the amendment now, but they were going to, I believe it was the 13th or the 14th, one of those amendments, that at the time the amendment was not what forbid slavery, it would have let slavery stand. This is during Lincoln's administration, but it never got anywhere. Fortunately, at the time, a different type of Republican Party called the Radical Republicans, and you can't compare it to these people. But Clarence Thomas would say that even in the debate on Friday night down in the deep red state of Texas, who is becoming less red. The right-wing candidate there, Raphael Cruz, otherwise known as Lying Ted, brought up the party of Lincoln. Well, this Republican Party is not the party of Lincoln at all. The Republican Party at one time had an equal rights amendment plank in their platform. That has long since disappeared when they realized that they could exploit the matter of women at the time. And it became currency. Now this is what we see, and this is a very troubling thing, that they're able to use things like Roe v. Wade. And Roe v. Wade, this whole idea of reproductive rights, they used to call it abortion, it's reproductive rights, is to limit the right of women. That is what it's all about. Because if you can limit the reproductive rights, the woman and her body, then you can go to other things, such as discrimination in the workplace, pay that is not equal, and also access to education. That's very, very important. And place college that is totally not affordable. And that's what this administration has done. They have went to these collectors. They have cut back on things like Pell Grants. Those things are very important. The Kavanaugh hearing is important next week, but there are other things that all surround Kavanaugh, such as the right of labor to organize. Kavanaugh would destroy that right of unions to do collective bargaining, which furthers the progress of working people and the society as a whole. And that is how this particular situation should be framed. So now the Republicans, as one would say, are in a pickle. They can attack Dr. Ford as DJ Trump did, and of course McConnell, the leader of the Senate, said it was not helpful. But McConnell said, well, at the end of the day, Kavanaugh will be on the Supreme Court. If they have the votes, he will be on the Supreme Court, but that's really not the issue here. The issue is, do they put a crook like Kavanaugh on the court? And what had happened with Thomas? Thomas has been continually under fire almost 20 years later. And today, with social media, it won't be a high-tech lynching with Kavanaugh. He'll be, as they say, the poster child in social media. And over time, what normally happens in these types of cases, other women eventually will come forward. And then Kavanaugh has a situation, would he resign from the court, or would in a number of years in the future get impeached? That could all happen. It's happened before with Abe Fortas. So, I mean, the whole situation here is that these are the kinds of events that shape the history of the country, particularly the judicial history of the country. We've seen these conservative courts. This is a cookie cutter that's been out that happened in Chile. A democratically elected President Salvador Allende was elected, and the coalition that he represented, Chile had a socialist government. The business interests in the U.S. through the CIA murdered President Allende. Because his coalition, the next election cycle, prior to the murder, assassination of him, had gained more votes. And then they put a dictator named Pinochet in his place. Pinochet murdered people, plundered the country, etc. Finally, he was brought back and put in prison, but at that time he was in his late 80s and 90s. But this shows what can happen to a country. And this is a situation that this country finds itself in. But fortunately, the old hourglass is on the side of progressive people. The election coming up in November, how will this affect it? We at the Ouija board, that is our model, see in certain some of these elections it could add up to a point, 2-point difference there on the outcome of this particular hearing. It will mobilize people. Yes, it will mobilize some conservatives, but they're already mobilized out there. But as one conservative said, well, if in the event that Kavanaugh either quits or cannot be confirmed, Why did they vote Republican? Well, it doesn't really matter there. It's the changing landscape of the country. It's sort of like a development of an oil well, that the ground is literally starting to shake. And from all types of people to the XL pipeline, that has been, they put out an environmental study incidentally on that. That is not really an environmental study coming out of this administration. They have a corrupt character that is at the FEMA administration named Long. He's now supposedly repaying the money for the cause, but that's not the issue. The issue is FEMA itself and what actually occurred down in Puerto Rico. A disgrace to the country. But these things are all adding up, and they're all fermenting around this Kavanaugh hearing that will take place next week. And because of the cavalier attitude of the Republicans to just push this through. Well, you simply can't push it through. You can confirm someone and put them on the court, but as the LBJ used to say, it's not over till the opera singer sings. And this is what they are facing. This thing will go on. No matter what happens on Thursday, if they try to lynch Dr. Ford, they've even talked about using women staff members. But the whole idea is to let senators themselves question these people and get the evidence out. And the FBI should have investigated this. But you can bet that after this hearing is over, if she is, as Thomas said, electronically lynched, there will be a press conference and more evidence presented. Private inquiry agents now, no doubt, are all over Maryland finding people. There are a lot of people out there. Now, some have come out in support of Kavanaugh. Some have come out in support of Dr. Ford. But there are other people there. There are people that worked at some of these institutions that are now retired, that perhaps have some evidence. There are all kinds of people out there that have not been interviewed, and they will interview these people, such as people that work with Kavanaugh in the G.W. Bush administration, such as people that have worked with him since he's been on the CERC, the D.C. CERC, and various other people from his community. They will all eventually, that are willing, will be interviewed, evidence will be collected, and it will not stop on Thursday, nor will it stop next week. That is the most important thing to remember. We'll go to our CAN presentation here, which is starting with Clarence Thomas, a good place to start, and Anita Hill being questioned by Orrin Hatch of Utah. And we'll see where that particular situation goes there. We'll do the baseball scores from Saturday night. And the reason we're doing this is effectively the last week of baseball. It will end on not this Monday, but next Monday, and we'll go then to the postseason. Nonetheless, the Phillies were in Atlanta 5-3, and in 10, the Giants were in St. Louis. The Cardinals pulled it out 5-4. The Mets were in Washington, D.C. The Nationals shut the Mets out 6-0. And in 11, the Orioles were in New York. The Yankees 3-2 in that game. The Orioles had 12 hits, no errors. The Yankees 7 hits, 1 error. The Yankees, as I believe, are basically about out of it. We'll see what happens next week. The Rays were in Toronto. The Blue Jays 5-2. The Royals were in the Motor City. Tigers 5-4. Two teams that are going home soon. the Brewers and Pirates in Pittsburgh. The Brewers got shut out. They're in the race with the Cubs. 3-0. The Cubs were on the south side of Chicago. This time they came out on the winning thing, John Lester, 8-3. Inning 11, the Sox were in Cleveland. The Red Sox, that is. Cleveland 5-4. Boston's already clinched their Eastern Division. The Angels and Astros in Houston was all Houston 10-5. The Reds were in Florida. Marlins 5-1. The Mariners, let me get to them here, were in Texas. Mariners 13 to. They actually shut the Rangers out. The Rockies and D-backs, a game that we looked at there. The Rockies are trying to stay in the race. The D-backs are 7 down in 7 days. They're out of it. 5-1 was the score there. Rockies, the Twins were in Oakland. Oakland 3-2. And finally, the Padres were in Los Angeles. The Dodgers 7-2. Mr. Rick Hill was a winner there. So that is the roundup. I'll check real clear here just to see if any new polling is out today. I don't think there is. But we'll be here on the Monday Morning Quarterback with the latest and greatest. Well, there's one poll. Des Moines Register here, Hubble up by 2 over Reynolds. That is the governor's race in the state of Iowa. And the rest of these are pretty much up in Pennsylvania. The Senate race there, Casey's up by 18, is really not a race. In Michigan, this is a Mitchell poll. Debbie Stabenow is up by 13. In Rhode Island, White House is up by 18. That's the Senate out of Rhode Island. In the Pennsylvania governor's race, Wolf is up by 19. In the Michigan governor's race, Whitmer is is up by 10, and in Rhode Island, the governor's race, Rindo is up by 7. In Iowa, we have Iowa 1. Frankenhausen is up by 15 over Blum. Blum, the Republican's been around quite a while in Iowa. And the Rasmus, you don't usually give this because it's an outliner. It has old DJ Trump up by 49. These vary on the approval ratings from time to time. Let's see here. We won't even mess with Jersey. California, what is it? California 25, Knights up by 2 over Hill. I don't know who Hill is. Anyway, we'll return on the Monday Morning Quarterback. We'll look at the talk shows. No doubt they will be talking about Kavanaugh, Dr. Ford, the hearing coming up next week. Slice it, dice it, however they can do it. We'll be on the Monday Morning Quarterback to talk about that, and we'll reference this particular presentation. And we'll have a numbers band. That's our financial program from the macro economic stage. That will come out sometime today. And hopefully we'll get the open source report, if not this weekend, early next weekend. Have a good Sunday. The rest of the weekend, as one would say.
And that your preference is, which is totally and completely understandable, that we go 1 hour tonight, 30 minutes on each side. Am I correct in that?
That's right.
Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Senator, I would like to start by saying unequivocally, uncategorically, that I deny each and every single allegation against me today that suggested in any way that I had conversations of a sexual nature or about pornographic material with Anita Hill, that I ever attempted to date her, that I ever had any personal sexual interest in her, or that I in any way ever harassed her. A second, and I think more important point, I think that this today is a travesty. I think that it is disgusting. I think that this hearing should never occur in America. This is a case in which this sleaze, this dirt, was searched for by staffers of members of this committee, was then leaked to the media, and this committee and this body validated it and displayed it at prime time over our entire nation. How would any member on this committee, any person in this room, or any person in this country would like sleaze said about him or her in this fashion, or this dirt dredged up, and this gossip and these lies displayed in this manner? How would any person like it? The Supreme Court is not worth it. No job is worth it. I'm not here for that. I'm here for my name, my family, my life, and my integrity. I think something is dreadfully wrong with this country when any person in this free country would be subjected to this. This is not a closed room. There was an FBI investigation. This is not an opportunity to talk about difficult matters privately or in a closed environment. This is a circus. It's a national disgrace. And from my standpoint, as a black American, as far as I'm concerned, it is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves, to do for themselves, to have different ideas. And it is a message that unless you kowtow to an old order, this is what will happen to you. You will be lynched, destroyed, caricatured by a committee of the U.S. Senate.
Committee will. Senator Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, there are two additional documents here, and I'm asking and take your advice from the two FBI agents who, if this has been furnished for over 2 hours under the rules, the affidavits from the two FBI agents indicating the inconsistencies as expressed by Professor Hill this morning. Is that not appropriate?
That is appropriate. The inconsistencies are not of all that much consequence. At some point, maybe we should read it. I think it may be helpful for you to read the entire thing in the record.
I only have 5 minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Well, you go ahead and put in the record, and I will read them because they're not of much consequence. But well, I think we should. Let me put it this way. I think people should know what they say.
Well, I think that they should know that the witness did not say anything to the FBI about the described size of his penis, the description of the movie Long Dong Silver, about the pubic hair in the Coke story, and describing giving pleasure to women with oral sex. That is not part of the original FBI report. And the agents are simply saying that there was no pressure upon the witness, and they specifically say the woman witness, or the woman FBI agent particularly, said that she was quite clear that she did not care whether it was general or specific. The interviewing special agent, a woman, that said if the subject was too embarrassing, she did not have to answer, but that was Professor Hill's statement. But the special agent said that the other agent, apologized for the sensitivity of the matter, but advised Professor Hill that she should be as specific as possible and give details. She was further advised that if the questions were too embarrassing, Special Agent Luton would leave the room and she could discuss the matter with Special Agent Jameson. And so I think that's appropriate only from the standpoint that you describe in your statement so poignantly, that these were disgusting things and yet they did not appear in the FBI report. That's enough. We'll enter it into the record.
I realize this is a bit unusual and the way we're doing this. My recollection was the witness had acknowledged that they did not appear in the report and had acknowledged that she had not said that to the agents as well.
That is true.
Mr. Chairman, you have your opportunity to...
No, I just wanted, because this is unusual. She hadn't had a
understand.
chance to see it. That's the reason I mentioned it now. But please continue.
You're very fair. Let me ask you, I think both of you say that both Judge Thomas and you say you never met each other until 1981. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Weren't you both members of the Black Republican Congressional Staff Association?
No.
You never were?
No, I never was.
Well, I don't have enough time to go into that one. I had heard you were and that you knew him there, and the other people stated that, and perhaps that's what I was advised by a person that called me who knew you both and was there with you both, but that's enough. I'm not leaving that out there as some sinister thing. I'm just trying to find out if you knew each other before, because I heard that because he knew you there and respected you and enjoyed you there and found you very professional, that it was there he made the contact to then bring you to the Department of Education.
Which group is this?
The Black Republican Congressional Staff Association.
No, I'm not a member of that. I've never been a member of that group.
In the 70, 79, or 80, sometime in that
I was
time.
in law school in 79 and 80.
80 and 81?
In 80, I graduated from law school in 1980 and went to work in private practice here in Washington, D.C.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. That was presented to me. Now, I heard Howard Metzenbaum say, and you have presented yourself and your testimony in an extraordinary way. I did think that Senator Specter pointed out some inconsistencies. But like Howard, I thought too of my daughter, my rainbow of life. And I would be outraged if such alleged conduct occurred directed to her. And then I've had the terrible pain of also thinking of my sons, raised by a very enlightened mother, responsive, still kiss their old man goodnight and things like that, and rather expensive, stalwart boys. And where that kind of conduct could lead them. Very troubling for me, because all we've heard for 103 days is about a most remarkable man, and nobody has come forward, and they scoured his every shred of life, and nobody but you and another witness apparently who's alleging no sexual harassment has come forward. And so maybe it seems to me you didn't really intend to kill him, but you might have. And that's pretty heavy. I don't care if you're a man or a woman, to know that 43 years or 35 years of your life or 60 years of your life where no one has corroborated what is a devastating charge, kind of a singular torpedo blow below the waterline, and he sinks. Well, 103 days of accumulated things never penetrated the armor. So I guess I would just say it is a very troubling thing to me. It really is. And, you know, leave out who leaked what to who or what media person let it out. That's all will be hashed. But let me tell you, if what you say this man said to you occurred, why in God's name, when he left his position of power or status or authority over you, and you left it in 1983, why in God's name would you ever speak to a man like that the rest of your life?
That's a very good question. And I'm sure that I can't not answer that to your satisfaction. That is one of the things that I have tried to do today. I have suggested that I was afraid of retaliation. I was afraid of damage to my professional life. And I believe that you have to understand that this response, and that's one of the things that I have come to understand about harassment, that this response, this kind of response, is not atypical. And I can't explain. It takes an expert in psychology to explain how that can happen. But it can happen, because it happened to me.
Well, it just seems that so incredible to me that you would not only have visited with him twice after that period and after he was no longer able to manipulate you or to destroy you, that you then not only visited with him but took him to the airport and then 11 times contacted him. That part of it appalls me. I would think that these things, what you describe, are so repugnant, so ugly, so obscene, that you would never have talked to him again, and that is a most contradictory and puzzling thing for me.